Good morning. You guys, thank you for coming. Thank you for having an interest in the work that Kettering and Gallup are doing. Do you mind closing that back door, please, and thank you. Sharon, I was telling you that I have young people. I think they think I'm a 100-year-old man. But they always say to me, Jim, is this the worst America's ever been? And I tell them, no, over my lifetime, it was definitely between 1968 and 1972. This looks like children's play compared to back then. Civil rights, we had assassinated Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and there were riots, 100 campuses at the same time, mostly Vietnam, Kent State had happened, shot the kids, civil rights. I think 100 different cities had fires, including clear out where I'm from in Omaha. I was part of several hundred students who even broke the glass to break into the ROTC building. I didn't even really know why we were breaking in, except I was just mad like everybody else. But I started thinking, when we were the most divided, well, if you want to see divided, that'd probably be the Civil War. The biggest war we've ever been in was the war against ourselves. We slaughtered, you guys, 700,000 sons of each other. I didn't see many women, but... and you think about somehow we put that back together again. Just to put a little drama in this, this building was finished, started building in 1865, just as the Civil War was closing. Closed it up in 67. I went to Smithsonian and said, I need to know Abraham Lincoln had a meeting in this building. It brings some stature to it, for moments like now. And they said, well, he couldn't have because he was shot a block and a half from here. So he was killed in 1865. But anyway, they came sliding back in about 6 months later, and they said, Jim, we got some really good news for you. This was the original convention center. But think about the size it is compared to the convention center up the street. Like where they'll have a boat show of 500 boats in there and all that. But this convened some of the most important game-changing moments in our country's history. One of them was our new president. Remember, Johnson came in afterwards. He was sort of a concession pro-slavery person Lincoln had to have. You all know that. But then next in came Ulysses Grant. Ulysses Grant held the meetings of Reconstruction. Somebody had to put the country back together again after what divided really looked like. Guess where the meetings were held? In this room. But if you can kind of feel the ghosts of democracy trouble that eventually got fixed, it was right here. But as Americans, and so many of you lead so many different things, there's so many of you I know, and it's great to have you here, and have so much influence with Americans. It's great to have you here, but you think, if those guys can put that back together again, we certainly can put this back together again. But I want to say thank you to the Kettering people. We talked, we were onto that. It's a primary mission of your institute. And we're going to keep working on this. We're going to keep looking. We're going to track it for 100 years, and we're going to keep looking for needles in haystacks, and we're going to convene here every time until we get her put back together again. Thank you all for coming.
Please welcome to the stage Gallup Principal Justin Lull.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you all today. Justin Lull, Principal with Gallup, and I'm thrilled to be able to share the results of a new study that Gallup conducted in partnership with the Kettering Foundation. About a year ago, Gallup and Kettering got together, and we set out to answer two very big questions. One, is democracy working? And two, if it's working, who is it working for? And so in order to answer these questions, we conducted the largest study that's ever been conducted on American democracy in the history of this country. We set out to hear from all Americans. So this data that I'm going to be sharing with you today represents the voices of 20,000 Americans. And we were intentional about including folks that were generally missed by this type of research. That means people on the furthest ends of the political spectrum, folks that are maybe not registered to vote, even those without online access. Because if we're going to answer the question, is democracy working? We need to hear from absolutely everybody. And that's what we set out to do. And so you might be wondering, Gallup, why now? Why in this moment are you wondering about the strength of democracy? Is this a reaction? And what I can tell you is we've been studying democracy and the strength of democracy for over 40 years now. In our first reading in 1984, we found that over 60% of the country felt satisfied with the way democracy was working. Over the next decade, it ebbed and flowed a little bit, and we found that about half the country was satisfied with the way democracy was going at that time. Take a look at what happens in 2020. We see a massive drop, and we hit our new low of 35% of Americans that feel satisfied with the way that democracy is working in this country. That was until our next reading in 2023, where we found that 28% of Americans felt satisfied with the way the democracy was going in this country. In our most recent poll, we found that about a third of the country felt confident with, or felt satisfied in democracy. So that's where we wanted to start. In our program with the Kettering Foundation, we started by asking Americans a very important question. Whether or not you agree that the current political leadership, how do you think democracy is doing? And here's what we found. Less than a quarter of Americans feel that democracy is doing well. About another quarter believe that it's doing okay. And over half the country believe that democracy is doing poorly right now. So, as I mentioned, we want to understand not only is democracy working, but who is it working for? And so we want to understand what was unique about that 24%. Who were the individuals that said democracy was doing well, and how are they different from those that believe that democracy is doing poorly? Here's what we learned. Those that believe that democracy is doing well are more likely to be financially stable. They told Gallup that they were living comfortably on their present income. They were less likely to feel lonely. They were also twice as likely to be satisfied with their community conditions. These conditions included things like housing, things like food, things like schools, and even the healthcare system. But beyond just how we're feeling about democracy, we were also curious about the system of democracy. Do Americans still believe in it? Is it the best form of government? So we asked, do you believe that democracy is the best form of government? Here's what we found. 2/3 of Americans do believe that democracy is the best form of government. A little bit less than a quarter or somewhere in the middle. And 10% of Americans openly told Gallup that they do not believe that democracy is the best form of government. Here's what that looks like by age group. You'll be hearing from a panel of experts on Gen Z a little bit later today. But one thing I want to call your attention to is there are some significant differences about how young people are experiencing democracy in this country compared to older age demographics. 65-year-olds and older, 80% of them are likely to believe that democracy is the best form of government compared to 53% of young people that believe democracy is the best form of government. The same trend holds true from those that believe that democracy is working well today. Now, beyond just how we believe in democracy as a system, we were also interested in understanding how do Americans feel that democracy is working for other people? Do we believe our fellow Americans are committed to democracy, or our political leaders, or even the government? Is it functioning the way a democracy should? Here's what we learned. Less than half the country believes that their fellow Americans are committed to having a strong democracy. Just a bit more than a quarter believe that their political leaders are committed to having a strong democracy. And 26% of Americans believe that the government decisions usually reflect the majority of what people want done. Now, it can't all be bad news, right? So we were interested beyond just the broad concept of democracy. What about the principles, those things that underpin our understanding of democracy? Where do Americans fall on these general principles? And what we found was there's some alignment here. When it comes to things like right to assemble, right to vote, right to protest, using political violence, Americans are generally aligned with those perspectives. What we found was that 84% of Americans believe that the U.S. is stronger because it has people from different races, religions, and cultures. We found that 83% of Americans believe that it is never okay for people to use political violence. 83% of Americans also believe that wealthy individuals should be limited in the amount of support they can use for candidates. And 8 in 10 Americans believe that even those that hold the most radical views should be allowed to assemble and protest and speak out against the government. We have a whole host of experts in line for you today. They'll be discussing and unpacking these findings and many others. I'd like to welcome to the stage Brad Rourke to take us through the first panel. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for being here. Come on up. I'm a quiver being able to moderate this panel. We have with us two true experts, and I'm proud to say both fellows of the Kettering Foundation. Sarah Longwell, a senior fellow of the Kettering Foundation, co-founder of The Bulwark and publisher of The Bulwark, which, if you care about democracy and saving it, it's a must-read. Also host of the Focus Group podcast, Required Listening, if you care about also about democracy and about people. An expert in understanding people and especially swing voters.
I love that. If you care about democracy, you have to listen to my podcast.
Right?
Okay. Appreciate that.
You can Venmo me. Erica France, research fellow at the Kettering Foundation, is associate professor of political science at Michigan State University, expert on authoritarian politics and democratic backsliding. And her latest book has the chilling title, The Origins of Elected Strongmen. She's also, and this is just my geekiness, she's one of the scholars behind the Autocratic Regime Data Set, which sounds very esoteric, but it is the definitive source for understanding things like how long autocratic regimes last and what kinds of events precipitate their collapse. So I'm really proud to be with these two experts. First question to you, Erica. You know, one of the big findings of the survey that Justin ended with is the depth of agreement that Americans seem to have. Big finding is that by a lot of measures, people think that democracy is the best form of government, diversity is a national strength, it's never okay to use political violence. From your perch, what do you make of that finding?
So first of all, thanks so much for having me here. This is a beautiful building. I can't get over it. The timeliness of this poll is really critical in that it's really vital that we get out the word that people support democracy, which was one of the basic findings that came out of this. And that result is consistent with what we're seeing globally, where in many instances across the world, there's just significant support for democracy as a form of government. Now, to be clear, it's not always clear that people understand what democracy means, but when asked, they say, yeah, I support democracy. And that really counters this other narrative that democratic erosion that's happening around the world is because people are demanding authoritarianism. That just is not true, and it's not consistent with this data or other studies. So rather what's happening is that democratic backsliding is a top-down process. So this is something that is happening on the part of political elites who are taking advantage of different institutional weaknesses, you could say, and eroding democracy from within. But in terms of what the ordinary people want, what this poll reveals is that they want free and fair elections and democratic freedoms. So again, getting the word out that there actually is support for democracy and that is something that unifies us is very timely and important.
Sarah Longwell, Saving Democracy, one focus group at a time. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, to me, what was interesting about that is you notice there's a gap, right? There's a difference between the number of people who say, yes, I prefer democracy, and the number of people who think democracy is working well. And so when you listen to voters, the thing that becomes clear really quickly, and I've been doing the focus groups since 2018, so through much of this political era, I've been listening to voters as they, and we ask about democracy a lot. The thing is that like so many other issues, democracy is becoming polarized, both as a word and also just sort of, because what you just said, I want to unravel a couple things. The one is, it's not clear that people know what democracy means. That is 100% true. First of all, if you ask a Republican about democracy, they think it codes Democrat, right? They think it sounds like Democrat because it's literally at the root of the word. And then as you go, oh, that guy's counting back there and I thought he was pointing at me.
No, he's good.
Okay. But the way that it's polarized is so Republicans believe that Democrats are a threat to democracy because they tried to steal the election in 2020. Democrats think Republicans are a threat to democracy because of Donald Trump and because of trying to overturn an election on January 6th. And so as a result, my guess is that if you looked at the partisan breakdown of the people who think democracy is working well at this moment, I bet it is far more Republicans than Democrats because people they know democracy by its fruits, not by its roots. And so they're saying, well, my guy won an election, and so yeah, democracy is working okay, versus if you asked 3 years ago, I bet that you would get a lot of Republicans who say democracy is not working. And so understanding the way that voters, I always think, so a lot of politicians, they ask me for sort of messaging advice, and one of the things I tell them is stop saying democracy, say America, because for people like in America, democracy is just that thing we do here. And so they say, yes, I believe in the freedom of speech. Yeah, they don't say pluralism because they like it the way that it was asked in that survey, which is, I believe that we should have lots of different races and that all those people are welcome here. And so Americans still believe in many of the principles of democracy, but the word itself is polarized, and the way that people are interpreting how it is manifesting their lives is also polarized.
So let's stay on that a little bit. And so on the second sort of big finding, which is the performance, right? So democracy, support for it, not working so well.
Yes. That's the gap I'm talking about, right?
So not only, maybe unpack a little bit about what you're hearing in your conversations in focus groups about the way that things aren't working right now.
Well, I mean, because when you say democracy to people, again, they're just, when I say they know it by its fruits and not by its roots, people are like, interpret that as, are things working in America broadly? And so an average person will feel, hey, prices are really high. Hey, I didn't like how things with COVID went. And they will take a bunch of the things that are happening that they think are negatives in the country, and they will interpret that as democracy. And so when they say it's not working well, what they mean is it doesn't feel like things in America are working well. They are not thinking about democracy up here. Now, some people are, and I will tell you, it does, the talking to Democrats about democracy and talking to Republicans about democracy feels pretty different. But also talking to people with college educations about democracy and talking to people that are working class people who do not spend any time. I was talking to a senator the other night. I was doing an event, and she said, hey, look, you can't pay for summer camp with democracy. And I think that is how a lot of voters feel. And so the sort of up-here-ness of democracy, which is, if I asked all of you very smart people, I'm sure, I don't know you, but I expect you're pretty smart. You really want to come and sit and listen to a bunch of us talk about polling. But if I asked you to describe democracy, you would talk about a bunch of different things. You'd talk about pluralism, you'd talk about freedom of speech, you'd talk about voting rights, you might talk about our institutions. And an average American voter is not going to talk about democracy that way. They're going to be like, why is everything so expensive? Because that is the framework for them about how, they're just thinking about like, how do I get to move through the world, and is it easy or hard? And the harder it is, the less charitable they are about democracy.
Shifting gears to, to you, Erica, and I might come back to that, Sarah, a little bit. But first, one of the findings in the survey was that Americans, by and large, have obviously low trust in institutions, been going down for decades. Also low trust that, that political leaders have democracy's best interest at heart. From your global vantage point, how troubling is that finding, that mistrust that leaders have democracy in mind?
So I think that that would be fairly consistent with what you would find elsewhere in backsliding context specifically. Because let's be honest, in a lot of these places, the political leadership might not have democracy's best interest at heart. And it's not that a lot of these leaders that pursue these power grabs are intent on destroying democracy when they do these things, but rather that they genuinely believe that political outcomes would be better if they were to hold on to power for longer. So, you know, I mentioned that a lot of this is a top-down process, and I just wanted to piggyback on what Sarah was saying about how ordinary people digest what democracy is. You know, in your regular life, you have your family, you have your job, you have all these activities. You're not reading philosophical pieces about what democracy means. However, you might have time to pick up shortcuts, like what your political leadership is saying about democracy. And we have a lot of evidence that these elite cues are really valuable for what people think is happening in democracy. And there's even evidence that when autocratic would-be autocrats attack democratic institutions, that elites get behind them and say that everything is normal and that all of this is consistent with a healthy democracy. So ordinary people who are, you know, paying slight attention to what's happening are saying, oh, well, you know, the leader of this party and the other elites around them said this is fine, so everything's fine. So, you know, we can't discount the fact that ordinary people don't have a ton of time to try to process what's happening, and that they're very receptive and influenced by elite cues, which can shift their understanding of what's normal in ways that enable them to continue to support these people in office. So, I mean, and obviously, like getting to the partisanship side of things, you're going to see that when leaders attack democratic institutions, the opposition is obviously going to say they're dissatisfied with democracy. But what happens is that these leaders often use really vilifying language towards their opponents, so their supporters even start being frustrated with how democracy is working, even though the leader of their party is the one that was attacking it. So there's a lot of complex dynamics, but no, I'm not surprised that there's a disconnect between satisfaction with democracy in practice and what you might think about it in terms of your principles.
I feel like one of the one of the takeaways is that there's sort of a top-down, bottom-up sort of divergence here, and I want to pursue that a little bit now. Back to you, Sarah. One of the findings that struck me was that Americans seem to mistrust each other's commitment to democracy. So this isn't like the leaders, but I mistrust you. Actually, I trust you implicitly, but if you were someone else. Is that what you're seeing, this sort of mistrust of like person to person? And then maybe let's like see, like, does that come from the top down, or where's that coming from?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a very low trust environment right now, but I want to, so I have a name that for this idea, although it's slightly different, but I've called it the Republican Triangle of Doom, and it is this. It is the toxic and symbiotic relationship between Republican elected officials, Republican voters, and the right-wing infotainment media. So let me just take, for example, the election being stolen, the lie that the 2020 election was stolen, and how that works in practice is this exact way you're talking about it, which is if you look at the polling about whether or not you think the election was stolen shortly after the election, it's not very high. People think it was a perfectly normal election, but Trump is out there saying, no, it was stolen. And the number one thing that happens that helps him out is Kevin McCarthy semi-normal Republican goes down to Mar-a-Lago and starts going on the news saying, yeah, it was really fishy. I don't know what happened. And the right-wing infotainment media, you got Newsmax, you got, which eventually bleeds up to Fox News, they're like, yes, it's stolen. And the voters who didn't think it was stolen, some did, right? Some initially did. And so the right-wing infotainment media is trying to feed those voters who think, hey man, our guy didn't win, something's off. And then, so they put pressure on the elites. The elites start going on Newsmax and saying, no, Trump is right, something bad is happening. And they reinforce each other. And over time, you go from 30% of people thinking that the election was stolen, or 30% of Republicans thinking the election was stolen, to 70% of Republicans thinking the election was stolen. Think about how a democracy survives when 70% of a political party believes that the election was taken away from them. I was doing a podcast with Adam Kinzinger shortly thereafter, and he was we were talking about January 6th, and he said something that I'll never forget, which is, the people who storm the Capitol think they're the good guys. Because if somebody has told you, and this is like a poisoning effect, if someone has told you they took an election from you, 1776, they are not counting your votes, the machines were switching things. And those people think, well, we've got to go fight for our country. They're just stealing elections. When people, and this has been the big change in the Trump era, is that somebody like Kevin McCarthy, 12 years ago, wouldn't have gone in for that lie. And now they do, and as a result, voters believe it because they look to the people in charge to cue them in on what is right and wrong.
Question for both of you then, with that backdrop, is there hope for a shared political culture in the United States?
So I think that we do have a shared political culture, and that the data that you put up here just now, or not you, but just put up just now, somebody put it up, is illustrative of that. And, I've talked about this before, but I teach a big class of political science students, and I ask them, do you think children should have the right to education? And we have a lot of different partisan views in the class, and it's like 95% of students believe in that. Now, they might disagree about the ways that we get there, but they believe in those fundamental rights. And some of these other questions, do you believe in freedom of speech? All of these different things that we think are central to an American political culture, emphasis on individualism, freedoms, liberties, and so forth, are widely shared by ordinary people. What differs might be in how they might translate those things into policy outcomes, but we do have a shared political culture, and that has persisted even though we've had different waves of immigration and all of these distinct dynamics that might make you think divided. We feel divided because our political leadership is telling us that we're divided, and in increasing the divides among ordinary people. But data-wise, most people are somewhat more in the middle. What we're seeing is a divide among the fringes, and I think an emphasis on the ways in which we're united could at least lower people's blood pressures.
Sarah Longwell, shared political culture? Can we have one?
We can and do, but it's not getting better. It's getting worse, and I feel like we have to be clear about that, in part because of the information environment that people are in, right? We used to have a monoculture where, we all watched the same movies and the same sports and had the same cultural references. That stuff is breaking down. We're not watching the same TV shows. We're not watching the same things on TikTok. In fact, I bet you a lot of people in this room aren't on TikTok, but everybody in Gen Z is, and they're getting their information in a different way. And I think it is getting harder, not easier, for us to understand each other and to define what our shared values are. And look, of course we all want education. The shared values tend to be almost the ones that are intrinsically human to us, right? We still have, but think about the idea that the President of the United States would generate and share an AI video of himself flying a plane, dumping feces on the American people. If you sit with that for a second, maybe some of you don't know that happened, but if you're on social media, it was the big thing over the weekend, is they pretended, the President of the United States said, oh, the No Kings protests, they're out there, so I'm going to do an AI video of me wearing a crown and dumping feces all over the crowd. Now, if you sit with that for a second and you think, is this our political discourse now? And our information streams, right? Like, people are a product. It's just like the food you eat, right? You junk, it's a garbage in, garbage out. Algorithmically, what we are like imbibing all the time is pushing us further and further apart from shared values. It is causing us, like Donald Trump is one of the first political leaders we've ever had. They want us to hate each other. So people think, and I'm sorry, you can tell me, you can stop me if I'm going on too long, but like, the idea that we all have a right to protest is something that probably is a shared American value, right? Well, I mean, it's free speech. Generally, the right to peacefully protest would be thought of as a shared American value. But Republicans spent the last however long before the No Kings protest, they said it was going to a Hate America rally. And obviously, which is interesting just because a few weeks before that, you had the murder of a young man, Charlie Kirk, who a lot of Republicans said in the wake of that, like, we've got to tone down our rhetoric, right? It's too hot. Bad things are happening. And clearly, like, they're not following that, because then they said they're terrorists. The people protesting are terrorists. So, like, the rhetoric that's being used, I don't think we've been in a situation before. Even, I was listening to the gentleman who talked up here, even during the civil rights movement, did we have a president and a compliant Congress that actively wanted to see Americans hate each other? Or did they look at the situation and think, man, how do we get people back together? But to have a political culture in which our leaders want us to hate each other is, I think, a new phenomenon that I certainly haven't seen in my lifetime.
60 seconds that we have left, I want to leave people with a small piece of hope. One thing that gives you hope for unity in America, Erica, then Sarah.
A long pause. I think to the degree that we've talked about, big tent movements that can coalesce around the things that the values that we share, maybe it's No Kings, but anything that can get us back to some sort of place where we feel more comfortable talking to our neighbor about politics, and maybe that's just disseminating results like this that remind people of what we have in common, and that a lot of the ways in which we are being divided is intentional on the part of our political leadership, like Sarah was mentioning. I mean, those sorts of things, I think, would give some glimmer of hope, but maybe Sarah has more
Sarah
to say.
Longwell, Hope for Hope.
Okay, so there's this parable that I think about a lot where this grandson is talking to his grandfather, and he says, he's asking about the nature of good and evil, and the grandfather says, well, in each person, there's light and dark, there's good and bad. There's two wolves, and one wolf is avarice and greed and anger and fear, and the other wolf is truth and goodness and decency and kindness, and they're in constant battle with each other. They're fighting each other. And the kid says, well, which one wins? Which wolf wins? And he says, the one you feed. And right now, the bad wolf is getting fed in the American people. And so the optimistic part of me is the one that says, can we recognize that, and will an opposition party rise up that understands that the good wolf is starving and somebody's got to feed it? And I think if that happens, I don't think humans are innately bad. I think they're being poisoned right now by our political culture, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to figure out how we feed the good side of things.
Kettering Foundation Fellows Sarah Longwell and Erica Franz, thank you for being with me. We have a very exciting segment after this.
Please welcome to the stage Gallup Chairman Jim Clifton, and joining us remotely, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.
Mr. Speaker, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me all right?
You're coming through loud and clear. How are things in Switzerland?
It's pretty amazing. Bern is a fascinating city.
The Speaker's wife is the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland, and they've recently moved there, so congratulations to Madam Ambassador. You and I talked a little bit about what we're doing here. You guys, it's a real highlight, I think, for me, and I hope for you. Think about the witness that we have here that we can talk to a little bit. You know, he was a professor in Georgia. He's actually originated as an academic. He's an expert, of course, on American history, but also, I think, nude on European history and democracy. Think about, so there's one thing. Think about this one. Democrats ruled the House from, I'm going to say 1955 to 40 years later, 1990, for 40 years. And it seemed that there was time for change, and Mr. Speaker went and interviewed a whole bunch of people and figured out a new contract with America. You talk about adjusting democracy. You know, that's the second thing. So he's lived outside and then as much inside as I would say any living American. You know, he's best known with my friends as being an idea factory. When you have a really hard problem, you call him over, and he's a factory of ideas. I think, excuse me, one of the, I think a real breakthrough in higher ed was what we did with Purdue, the Gallup Purdue Index. That thing is still quoted. I mean, like every day, everywhere. We found a couple real needles in haystacks. Our well-being on thriving that started at Healthways is the standard now around the world for thriving, and it created a Nobel Prize. 16 of the papers that were reviewed for Angus Deaton's Nobel Prize were based upon that research. But thank you for all of that, and thank you for being on our show today. I want to start out with this question. So one of the things we found in the poll is that 2/3 of Americans believe that democracy is the best form of government. But that means that 1/3 doesn't believe democracy is the best form of government. This gets a little worse, and that is that if you go to people between the ages of 18 and 29, only 50% believe that democracy is the best form of government. If we could have that audience out here right now, what would you tell them is special, the people that don't feel it's the best form? What would you tell them is special about American democracy?
I think I'd probably start where Churchill was when he said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all those others. It is the only system that gives everyday people a protection against the ruthless, the violent, the criminal, the corrupt. And when you look around the world, ask yourself, what's the alternative model that for the normal average person offers both a level of power, because you get to vote for people to whom you loan power. It offers you a level of protection, because the core of democracy is the rule of law. And in the American version, it basically ties your rights directly to God, because our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, says we are endowed by our Creator. We're not endowed by lawyers. We're not endowed by kings. We're not endowed by rich people. Our endowment individually to every person in this audience comes directly from our Creator. And because of that, we have absolute rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that was an earth-shaking, radical document when it came out in 1787, led to the government of 88. You look at that and you think to yourself, where else in the planet do you have these kind of protections for normal people? And in almost every case, it's a model which somehow grew out of the American experience. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now. People get frustrated, one, because it's an inherently slow, difficult, frustrating system. You got, 345 million Americans. We have different hopes, different dreams, different values. And self-government is a method of sublimating civil war so that we can deal with each other with a minimum level of violence. But it's about power. It's about where are we going to go? What are we going to value? What are we going to spend resources on? And all those things get very tense and very difficult. And the founding fathers, who had studied this a great deal, most of them had written one or more state constitutions. Most of them had thought deeply about what was wrong with the British monarchy. They'd been deeply influenced by Montesquieu, a French philosopher, who'd written a book called The Spirit of the Law, in which he proposed that to preserve freedom, you needed to have three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. And remember, I'll close this, Jim, and toss back to you, but I just want people to understand what's going on. The founding fathers had two great goals based on their experience of reality. They'd fought an 8-year war with Great Britain. Their first goal was to have a government strong enough that it could protect them from the French or the British or the Spanish or whoever might try to come and take over. Their second goal, having created that government, was to make sure that it couldn't be strong enough to control the country against the wishes of the people. So they adopted the first 10 amendments, which were really forced on them by Thomas Jefferson, and are designed to limit the government. The purpose of the Constitution is to create a limited government and to protect you and me. And so one of the things they thought of was, how do we block dictatorship? Well, we're going to have three branches. One branch we're going to divide into two. The House will get elected every 2 years based on population. The Senate will get elected every 6 years based on the states. So 1/3 of the Senate will come up every election cycle. All of the House comes up. But they really feared the House as the most populous would be the strongest and most dangerous. So they then created a chief executive, and initially personified by George Washington. And finally they said, in order to settle certain kinds of decisions, we need a court system. And they created a court system, although it's important to remember, the Supreme Court is supreme over the other courts. It's not supreme over the legislative and executive branches. So they had this very complicated balance of power. And it was to design a machine so inefficient that no dictator could make it work. And guess what? They designed a machine so inefficient that we can barely get it to work voluntarily. And they would have said, yes, that is the price of freedom.
Newt, you had a quote that goes like this: "The genius of American democracy is that it allows every generation to rethink, reinvent, and renew the country." So in that new generation, when the new Gingrich comes along with the new contract, adjust and change how democracy operates, what do they want? What's the next generation want that's different?
Well, I think we're in a period of sort of three waves of parallel confusion that synergistically interact. One wave is, are we a global system with nations as sort of smaller parts, or are we still a national system operating inside a global world? That's one, and that leads some people to say we ought to have open borders, we don't really need to worry about the American Constitution, the United Nations ought to be more powerful than the United States, etc. The second challenge is basically cultural. This system was built on the concept of hard work, private property, a kind of equal opportunity but not equal outcome, a sense of great toughness. All the founding fathers were tough. Well, we've gone through a cultural cycle which has led to challenging those kind of values. Why should you have to work? We're rich enough, you can, do your own thing. Why should you have to strengthen patriotism? After all, it's not necessarily, you know, what your value tells you. And of course, we've had a huge hostility to the traditional American system in almost all of our elite universities. And over 30 or 40 years, that's had a significant impact in what people have come to believe. The third challenge, which is true across the entire modern world, is that the contract that said we're going to do economically so well that every generation will get better and have more, that contract is totally broken down. And so one of the reasons you're getting Mondami in New York as a socialist is he's campaigning on affordability. He's understood that there are thousands of New Yorkers making $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year who can't afford to buy a house. Many of them can't even afford to pay rent. And so the gap has grown, and the economy has not delivered for the average person. And so you have, whether it's France or Belgium or Italy or Japan, you have this turmoil now. So you have economic turmoil, cultural turmoil, and coping with a world. I'm talking to you now from Switzerland. We're now so interconnected worldwide that we really haven't found a way to culturally and politically catch up with the things that are possible in this larger world.
To that point, I just read, I think it was a Pew poll, that of the 2024 college graduates, 52% of them couldn't get a job that used their college degree or had a living wage. So you see the tens of thousands of people going back to the Mamdani. You have a lot of people that are looking for a new way because whatever the current system is, they promised me if I got a degree that I'd get a good job with a living wage, and now I don't. So whatever the system is doesn't work for me.
Well, look, I believe this is a huge crisis. It alienates the young because they don't, Yankelovich years ago described what he called a giving and getting contract. What am I going to give to my society, and what am I going to get back for it? And I always thought that was a very useful model. Now, partly because I've spent a fair amount of time in France and Belgium and Germany and Italy and now Switzerland, the problem's much worse in Europe. They have both adopted values-based legislation, which has crippled them economically, particularly the green movement, which has led to an enormous crisis in the cost of energy and the ability of industries to be productive. And they've had a cultural system in which the elites have maintained power in ways that have alienated probably 40 to 45% of their population. Well, we're in some ways on the same trail. And if we don't find a way to make free enterprise capitalism work for average people, if we don't find a way to get back to very substantial economic growth, we're going to see a lot more populist rebellion, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left, but always with a sense of grievance that the system isn't working for them. I think this is a real challenge across the entire Western world, and one which I think we have not had nearly enough serious thought about how we're going to have to break out.
We have James Carville's going to come on this morning, Newt. He's got that line about "it's the economy, stupid," which has been quite a famous slogan. I think it's true. But I think if you drill down one more time, I think you'll find it's my job, stupid. It's my good job, one with the living wage, one that makes me feel like I do something important, like I'm valuable, gives me dignity enough where I can find a spouse and do all those kinds of things. But I think that's something new that we need to consider. I wanted to go right from there because you and I have talked so much about higher education. You have so many ideas on it. So many people use you as a go-to man for that. Although we have so many problems, our economy at the very top is producing like it never has before. The 1,200 unicorns in the world, America has 750 of them. We have $100 trillion of GDP in the world. Americans produce 30 trillion of it. One company, Apple, is worth more, has a higher market cap than all the market caps in Germany, the entire system. Microsoft itself is bigger than the entire market cap of Germany. All that's working. When you trace these things back, boy, they go back to you. Well, look at here, we got Gallup. Dr. Gallup was a professor at Iowa. We got Clifton Strengths that's exploded. He was a professor at Nebraska. So much comes out of there. What role, then universities, we did a poll that their approval ratings knew to have dropped 30 points. What we found is that when anything drops 10 points, things are really serious. The first thing that Americans say about it is that they're teaching politics. What do you think the fix is? I mean, higher education seems, you could argue, but they might be the institution gets the game ball for all the success we've had over 250 years. How do we work through that? We've got about 5 minutes.
Well, look, I think I'm probably a genuine radical in the sense that we had a set of values that worked. And those values, starting really in the 20s among the intelligentsia, and then with increasing speed in the 50s and 60s, have been directly assaulted by the academic class. And for example, we had a remarkable school system, but it was based on discipline, toughness. You actually had to learn. You actually had to do your homework. There's a remarkable new book called The Failure Factory, which is an 8-year study of the Baltimore City schools, in which there are 4 high schools in which not a single student, not one, can pass the state math exam. Not one out of 2,300. Well, how are they going to have a decent future? How are they going to get a job that matters? And so a lot of what happened was we split into extraordinarily successful people, doctors, inventors, entrepreneurs, very well-off people who were allowed to impose their values on their institutions, mostly the academics and the news media, and then the rest of us who were left behind. And in one level, it's working class people who still work, but clearly get a much smaller share of the total pie and have a much more difficult life. And another level, it's a group of people, often minorities, who are just totally cheated by the system. And it's not a function of money. The Baltimore City schools, for example, are the 3rd most expensive schools in the country among all the big cities. And yet they are a total, abject, complete disaster, ruining the lives of thousands and thousands of people. And nothing's done about it. So you've had this period where there's been kind of an alliance between a group of people who failed and a group of people who dislike America. And that alliance has led to policies which over the last, I would say, really began a little bit, to some extent, with Johnson and the Great Society. And there's a brilliant book called The Tragedy of American Compassion, which looks at the way in which they fundamentally changed our approach to being poor, from helping you get out of poverty to helping you be maintained in poverty. And then it accelerates dramatically with, I would say, with Obama and Biden as sort of Obama's 3rd term. But you ended up in a system much larger than politics, in which the institutions and the culture did not provide the kind of changes that are needed. I would argue for a lot of people, for example, that a good apprenticeship into a program that pays a pretty decent wage is a better economic future than getting a degree from an expensive university at extraordinary cost in a field in which nobody's being hired. And that's the kind of mismatch we currently have between the real world reality and the intellectual world reality.
So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Very enlightening. See you soon. Have a great day and send our best to...
Jim, it's always good to talk with you.
Okay. See you later.
Now please welcome to the stage Gallup's Justin Lal and a man who does not need an introduction, Mr. James Carville.
James, welcome to Gallup.
Thank you. Ever since I was a kid, I've known about Gallup, and I've worked in 22 different countries, and I've actually found the most reliable poll is the Gallup poll. I know y'all poll in Colombia and Mexico and all over the world, so I always look for it. I've always known about your organization, I always respected it. I'm delighted to be part of this presentation today. Thank you.
James, I am eager, and I'm sure everyone in this room is very eager to hear your thoughts on American democracy today. But before we do that, I actually want to go back in time to the 1980s, particularly around 1986. We just saw earlier today that that was a point in America where we were most satisfied with American democracy. Now, you had just successfully run Bob Casey's campaign at the time. Can you take us back to that moment? What did it look like then? What was different about how political leaders were listening to their constituents during that moment?
I 86 was my first big winning campaign, without it. But I just was talking to a colleague of mine. And think about this, in 1988, in New Jersey, I was Frank Lautenberg's campaign manager. We won by 8. Bush beat Dukakis by 8. You're not going to see a 16-point differential anymore in American politics. That's just not, that's not going to happen. I think that in politics, to me, was, when I was coming up, was exciting because you kind of, what I call political Presbyterianism, that everything is ordained. And we've all kind of contributed to that. I am not, by way of reference point, I am not a political Presbyterian. I think that politics are driven by inspirational people. I do not think they're driven by the great issues and debates of the day. But, you know, I'm growing up, I'm 15 years old, I'm a Catholic kid, I'm kind of pro-civil rights. In South Louisiana, I see John Kettering and I go, God, man, this fucking guy's cool, gee whiz. All right, and then, you know, maybe some people came up and they saw Reagan and they, well, I like the way this, he's entirely different. Or they saw Bill Clinton or Obama. And I think that the problem with the Democrats, a little bit different than other people, is we haven't had an inspirational presidential candidate since 2012. And I am a big believer that inspiration moves people. And there's no doubt, I mean, the evidence is we're in a rut. All right, we're in a partisan rut. We're in every kind of rut that we can think about. And why would, they don't see anything coming out. Democracy, whatever it means to people, is not really producing very much. Stagnant incomes for the first time in our history. The interest on the debt is now more than we spend on defense. Our young people are probably more disconnected for good reason than at any time that I can remember. They don't think they'll ever be able to buy a house. They don't think they'll ever be able to educate children. And we've participated in huge intergenerational theft. My generation has stolen everything that we can get our hands from young people, and they kind of have figured it out. Not directly the thing, but we get all the benefits. When I was a young person, I tell people, in 1971, I got out of the Marine Corps. I got $300 a month. My law school tuition was $110. I literally would work offshore, and I would pay the registrar out of my pocket. All right, I had $300 in 1971. I could go to French Quarter. I could hire a tutor. I could do whatever I wanted. I just had to stay registered. Then I go buy a house. I'm guaranteed the lowest possible interest rate. I'm guaranteed no down payment. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't own a house one day. I never thought about it. And so, hope is a fleeting thing. And I mean, I've just seen it in my lifetime. And, and so the fact that people are losing faith is actually an explainable phenomenon. It really is. We thought we could change everything. We'd gone to the moon, we'd changed civil rights, we'd done things were moving, and we thought that there was Martin Luther King told us the arc of history bends toward justice. Shit, it's bending in a ditch now. So there's a reason that the pessimism is not totally that you can understand it.
Yes, you can.
You look like Danny Meyer.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Danny's a good friend of mine. The restaurateur, if you look at him, looks just like Danny Meyer.
Appreciate that. You're touching on an important topic here, which is the middle class and the disappearing middle class. Now, you famously and publicly advocated for the middle class in your book in 2012. It's The Middle Class, Stupid, and I think you've put forth quite a few important solutions here. Now, that book specifically was launched over 10 years ago at this point. The question is, have we made progress with the middle class, and what does that mean for American democracy?
This is a great question. Stan Greenberg wrote a book, and I wrote a book on the middle class, and we never could figure out what the middle class is. So as a PhD who's taken fares on, no, excuse me.
Very on-brand ringtone.
What do you say about a PhD that's a fare collector on a streetcar? Or what about a high school educated guy that's worth $50 million? All right? So I think, and of course it's something you deal with in your professional life all the time. It's the old joke about the guy at the end of the bar clutches his chest and says, call me an ambulance, call me an ambulance, call me an ambulance. And the bartender says, okay, you're an ambulance. All right? I err on the side of the middle class as a state of mind. All right, and so I grew up, my dad was a postmaster, my mother sold encyclopedias. I don't view myself as a wealthy guy. Okay, I view myself one way. I've been with Palantir for 15 years, so I'm doing pretty good. But I still that doesn't shape the way I think. So I think middle class is more a state of how somebody views themselves than an actual economic range or an educational range or anything like that. That this morning, I don't know why I did it, the Washington Post sent out asked the people who subscribe to fill out how often you read this, what sections you read, what's your age, your education level, just like every other post. It's just kind of fun sometimes to. So every now and then I'll get a call. I always answer any survey, particularly political ones, because I don't care about the answers. If I know the questions, I would rather see a questionnaire. If I'm running against another campaign, if there was one thing I could get, would be the questionnaire, because I know what they're thinking, because I know what they're looking for. The questionnaires are the hardest thing to do. The sample, you keep refining that, you can get better and better, but your survey is never going to be any better than your questionnaire, ever. And so you can have the most pristine, correct results, but if you're not asking the right questions, it's no good. I'd rather have, on a scale of 10, a 10 questionnaire and 7 accuracy than have a 7 questionnaire and 10 accuracy. And I've always believed that way.
I'd like to have you continue to advocate for good question asking in polls in the future. That's very important to us. Thank you for doing that. I want to go back, not all the way to the 1980s, but also to a very famous moment in your political career. I think everyone in this room is well aware of your leadership for Bill Clinton's victory in 1992. Now, we saw earlier on slides that about half the country in the 1990s was satisfied with the way American democracy was going. I'm curious if you can take us into the war room. What were the conversations about democracy at the time? Were you thinking about it? Was it an active part of your campaign, or did it feel more guaranteed then than it does today?
I thought about this. We never thought about it. We never said this is American democracy. We just assumed that people were going to vote. now, so I think of the word democracy, first of all, it's like anything, it can mean, if you ask 10 people what democracy means, you're probably going to get, no one's going to say, well, demo is a Greek prefix, meaning people of, ocracy means this. I always tell people, you always have to break a word down to ascertain its real meaning, like the nuns used to do when I was in the 3rd grade. In politics, okay, let's break it down. Poly is a Greek prefix meaning what? Come on, what does poly mean in Greek? Many, correct. Ticks are blood-sucking animals, so now we know the real meaning of the word politics. No one knew, they did it. Now the most important person in American politics is the guy that can draw a congressional map to disenfranchise the most people that they want disenfranchised and enfranchise the most people that they want. Democracy, 18% of the United States, now listen to this, 18% of the United States elects 52 senators. In order for the Democrats, by the time this is over with, to win the House of Representatives, we're probably going to need to win somewhere around, you'd have to check with some of the quants, that's not my end of the business, probably 52.5% to 53% of the vote. So wait a minute, 18% of the country elects 52 senators. In order for the other party to control the other legislative branch, they need to win well over 50%. My question is, what democracy? I know we're never going to go to the Norman Rockwell, New Hampshire town hall. In democracy, it's hard. I remember during the Arab Spring, I was teaching at Tulane, and I said, let's say there's going to be an election in Egypt, and I want to go over there. How many of y'all would come with me and help me? 20 kids in a class, 18 raise a hand. I said, good. Where the polling places going to be? What's the age to vote? What are the qualifications? Are they going to have a parliament? Are they going to have a slate? Are they going to do like we do? Are they have districts? Are they going to do like they do in Israel? That parties put up slate and it's proportional. When you talk about democracy, you're talking about all kinds of different things, all kinds of different permutations. In Louisiana, we elect, I don't know, every 11 different statewide officials. In New Jersey, they elect 2. Whereas Louisiana, a more perfect democracy than New Jersey is. And I used to teach this, or I teached at it because I never was able to really come to a definitive conclusion. But where 18% of the country controls 1/2 of 3 branches of government, and by the way, in this century, the Democrats have lost the popular vote 2 times. The Supreme Court is 6-3 Republican. So if you ask me, do I think democracy is fair and working? Nah, not too much. Not too much. Not that, but, and of course, then you go to the Churchill thing. What's the alternative?
So you're touching on an important point here, and that's that the majority of Americans do not believe that democracy is working well. And one of the things that we found in our survey that only 1 in 4 Americans believe that their political leaders are committed to having a strong democracy. What do you make of that? What do you make of that overall distrust of political leaders or lack of confidence in their ability to support a strong democracy?
So, why? So democracy, I'll give you, this is not even agreed upon definition, but let's just say that democracy means the best possible system that we use to reflect the will of the people. That's just something off the top of my head, but I'll give myself some credit. That's probably about as close as you're going to get. How much time do you think they spend here, or do they spend in the Capitol in Raleigh, or the Capitol in Baton Rouge, or the Capitol in Springfield, or the Capitol in Sacramento, or the Capitol in Austin, thinking, how best can we participate and understand and reflect the best interests of the will of the people? How can we get some 180 IQ redistricting map drawer in here and do whatever we can to rig the system in our favor. And by the way, how can we most set up a system to fund ourselves that most reflects the interests of the people that give us money as opposed to the people? That's not an exaggeration, what I'm saying. I'm sorry. That's just true. And so why should I believe, the more you know, the worse it is. I travel a lot. I'm an old man. I was in Budapest and Prague and Munich and Rome and, I don't know, Vienna. The most thing that I get is people come up and they'll literally touch me. And they'll either, most people call me James, thank God. Some call me Miss Cole. He said, I'm so scared. I said, you're not scared enough. If you knew more, you'd even be more scared. And that's just something I've observed over a period of time. I mean, we got real trouble here. I mean, we really do. I mean, we shouldn't delude ourselves that people in your data clearly reflects this, that there's some danger that we just let the whole thing go. I mean, it really is. It's not and you have 24%, and, you know, people will start arguing, well, we don't know what, but there's a real sense that the whole thing is slipping away from us.
So, how do we fix it? How do we get back on track, James?
Danny?
Yeah, let's get to work here. We, obviously saw in the polls, and you alluded to something I think that's important, that there's an incentive to rig the system, as you put it, versus listen to the people. Is it an incentivization problem? How do we systemically change the incentives so that more political leaders are doing the right thing?
Listen to me. There's nothing more consequential than an election. Okay. And we have, I go back to the fact that we've really been on a slow deterioration for a period of time. Suppose, I think that the potential good news is I think people at some level kind of understand this. And if you give them something that they think is different, that they think can work, that can be a departure, I think they would embrace it. Last night I was thinking, I came up, suppose the Democrats ran Mitch Landrieu for president, Liz Cheney for vice president. And the slogan was, somebody needs to take out the garbage. I don't know. Maybe people would say, hey, wait a minute, I'm just giving you two names. I could give you any combination that you could fantasize about. But the political Presbyterians tell us that can't happen because it has to be the Republican that most reflects what Trump's want. It has to be the Democrat that most reflects what the Democratic progressive interest groups want. I don't know about the Republicans. I'm not one. I know that's not true of the Democrats. But why wouldn't? Because we let ourselves be too dictated by interest groups in our own party, to the point of engaging in what I think was one of the great politically destructive movements of this century was the movement of identity politics, which was stupid, dumb, counterproductive, bad for everybody. But that's what people, and the only way that you change the subject is you just change the subject. And whatever you can do that connotes to people that I want to turn the page. There's the most thunderous sound in all of politics is the sound of a turning page. I can remember it from like 15 years ago. I hadn't heard it in a while. But I still believe that fundamentally.
So I want to dive in just a little bit further here about the connection between leaders and people. And, we saw a little earlier there was a large disconnect between Americans who believe the government was making decisions that reflected the will of the people. And I want to understand from your perspective, how can we re-engage constituents? How can we re-engage American people in the process? How can we make them feel heard and actually feel like their voices matter?
You know, I'm kind of a one-trick pony. If you get inspirational people that are able to communicate, because people right now do not feel empowered. They feel smaller than they've ever felt. All right, they just do. And I don't even have to look at the survey to know that. So how do we get people to buy in to the process, or whatever we want to call this thing? And there's only, but I go back and you would be stunned at the power of inspiration, the power of making an argument, of framing an argument, of contrast and pairs, groups of three, the power of narrative. So I taught communications for 17 years, 4 years at community college, 9 years at private university, 4 years at state university. And I would try to drill into my students that the elements and principles of communications are never change, they're constant, and they're simple, and no one uses them. Every story that you have ever heard, from the time that you spent on your mama or your daddy's knee, to the last play that you went to the last book you read, is all the same. Setup, conflict, resolution. You can't tell a story any other way. And you always use, and there's a reason that people use contrast and pairs. There's a people, we just thought to think in groups of threes. If the Holy Spirit didn't exist, they'd have to invent him, because they couldn't have two. And you can't have four. You got to have three. That's just the rule. Don't fight the rule. Give them three. No one has a 6-point platform. Okay? The only even number that people gravitate to is 10. That's it. Maybe 9 in baseball, but that's it. And so if you engage people and you communicate with people in a way that they're accustomed to receiving information, you're always going to be more effective communicator.
James, we have time for one last question here. What makes you optimistic about the future of American democracy?
Our history. I mean, at every, you're like on an airplane and it keeps going down and they think of something and they pull it out of the dive, or you always kind of get through the thunderstorm. But of anything, and I'm passionate about history, and, we seem to have had really dark moments, and kind of at the last minute somebody grabs and pulls us back. But that's the solace I take, is that we've always thought of something. Somebody has always come along at the right time. I mean, if you think of periods of despair that we've had previous to this, they were pretty low. We're so self-absorbed. We say, oh my God, this is the worst it's ever been. I can't believe this. And, well, we had all kinds of things where we could have blown the gasket. We didn't. And I'm just fundamentally believe that out of these ashes, the talented, won't be me, because I'll be 81 Saturday, but that talented people are going to come and pull us out. But that's my hope. And I don't have much else other than that to offer you in terms of hope.
That's great. Well, anything's better than nothing for hope. Thank you, James. We appreciate you being here and spending your time with us here at Gallup today.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage our final panel, Aaron Parnas, C.J. Pearson, and moderated by Rachel Genfaza.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to Gallup and Kettering for having us for this conversation about Gen Z and democracy and where we go from here. I'm really honored and thrilled to be here today with CJ Pearson and Aaron Parnas, who are two of the leading voices in Gen Z politics, but I would argue in politics for at large, just given the shift in our media ecosystem. Aaron has a massive following with over 4 million followers on TikTok, but many millions elsewhere. And he is one of the fastest growing voices on Substack in particular. He gives breaking news updates multiple times a day. If you aren't subscribed or following him across the many platforms, I encourage you to do so. And CJ is a leading voice on the Republican side of the aisle. He is an influencer, content creator, and consultant working on influencer strategy for organizations, and he has also been dubbed one of the leading creators who has helped to shift the Republicans' appeal with young voters and has a massive audience as well. So thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So given the data that we've been looking at in this polling from Gallup and the Kettering Foundation, we see that many young adults express uncertainty about democracy. And I'm curious, what experiences or environments make it feel real and relevant in your perspective and like it's actually working for them?
Yeah, I think overall, if you look throughout the country, this spans demographics. Are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with our government right now, and probably for good reason, right? You look at the fact that we are nearing week 4 of a government shutdown. It doesn't look like Congress is doing much to get things done. And as someone who lives in D.C., I have a firsthand experience in seeing people really don't work much in this town, apparently. And I think a lot of young people feel the same way. And I think that the reason they feel that way is because a lot of the day-to-day things that they're dealing with aren't being addressed by many mainstream politicians. When people look at, the rise of Mamdani, which I talk about a lot, it's a very real reason why he's been able to strike the chord that he has in a city like New York, because there's an affordability crisis in America. For a long time, those on the left didn't talk about it. For a long time, those on the right didn't talk about it. And so I think that a lot of people say that, if we're electing these leaders, we actually want them to benefit our life in some type of tangible way. And so I think that's why we've seen a kind of decline in the idea among some younger voters and as to whether or not democracy is working for them. But I think that at the end of the day, what we've been able to see is that democracy does work, because if you don't like the direction that our country is going, then you're free to change it, as the people in New York will likely make the decision to do in voting for Mamdani. Well, that's not something I would do. That's their prerogative. And if that works for them, then democracy has worked. If it doesn't, then they have the opportunity to vote again and to right that ship when it's that opportunity. So I think that, for all the reasons that people have misgivings about democracy right now, they should realize that it's democracy that may have gotten us into some of these messes, but it's also going to be the vehicle for change that gets us out of it as well.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree with more. But I will say this, looking back over the past however long polling has existed, approval rating for our institutions has been 20%, 30%. When has Congress had a positive approval rating? It just hasn't. So it's not necessarily unique to Gen Z, but what is unique to Gen Z and young people right now is social media. Social media has really exacerbated kind of the threat many people feel that democracy is under right now. Social media, every morning and every night, Gen Z scrolls for about an hour on TikTok or Instagram or any other social media platform. And social media rewards outrage, rewards misinformation, rewards conspiracy theories, rewards headlines like democracy is under attack. And so when you're fed that information hours every single day, when Gen Z isn't consuming information from TV or from print, doesn't even know what a radio is, you get a situation where all you know is democracy is under attack. I do agree, democracy is working, and democracy, to me, I think will survive even this period that we're in. But at the same time, if you don't actually educate young people on the current state of affairs in our nation, then you're going to get a situation where the young people of today become the elderly of tomorrow, and then everyone thinks that democracy is failing, not just young Americans.
I think to follow up to the point that you just made about the role that social media has played in this, I think it's important to note that there are no editorial standards on TikTok. There are no editorial standards on Instagram. And so you're able to label anyone that you wish, a fascist or whatever it may be, whatever word of choice, on both the left and the right. And many people, just take that and they run with it. And so I think that's a big reason why so many people feel, as you just said, that democracy is under attack, even though, again, we just had an election. We will have several more elections, and as far as I know. So I think that's the thing that is really interesting to me. And also, too, it's like, the question is, though, like, how do you actually police that? You really can't, because it's just, then you get into the issue of censorship, right? I don't know.
So we're going to get into all of that. You guys are getting a little bit ahead of me. But CJ, you mentioned the affordability crisis and the fact that many young people in this country just feel like life isn't affordable for them and that the cost of living is too high. How do today's social and economic circumstances shape Gen Z's expectations for democracy? And what can we learn from their relationship to that into civic engagement?
Yeah, I think going back to kind of my first answer is that I think because so many young people have anxiety in this country right now about the economic state of our nation, whether or not they'll ever be able to afford a home, how they're going to be able to afford that apartment in the city that they've always dreamed that they would one day live in. It's kind of created some would say, unrealistic expectation upon government and its ability to provide those things to them. I think maybe we have a different philosophy as to, how to actually address that, because I think the affordability issue is important in the sense that, like, no one should be struggling to buy everyday goods and all of those things or whatever. Are you going to be able to buy that super nice, cozy or, cushy apartment in New York City? Maybe not. Maybe go spend some time in Oklahoma for a bit. I don't know. But it's just a matter of expectations. And a lot of people, it's so interesting to me. It's like you go on TikTok and they'll say, I can't believe it's so expensive to live in New York City. Well, then don't live in New York City. Oh, it's so expensive to live in D.C. Then don't live in D.C. And so I think that while it's important for our leaders to address these issues through actual policies that work and will bring down the cost of these these everyday necessities, tackle inflation, all of those things. I also think, too, is that young people cannot expect the government to provide for everything on their wish list, and also, in that same vein, be upset at the government when they're not able to actually meet them where they are.
Yeah, I actually agree. And I think that one of the reasons why we're in that situation is because media literacy, ethics, and civics aren't taught in all schools across the country. So young people don't know how government works and what the federal government is supposed to do versus state government versus local government. Congress was never intended to bring down specific costs of housing in a specific municipality in a random city in America. That's the job of the state legislature. That's the job of local government. But most young people don't understand that, and that's not their fault. That's the fault that, politicians run on a message, we're going to eliminate student debt, get into Congress or get into the White House, and aren't able to accomplish that. They're going to reduce the cost of housing. They run on that message, and then it doesn't actually happen. And so young people get disenchanted. They don't turn out. They think that Congress and the federal government isn't working for them. And it's this constant cycle, and it happens on the right, it happens on the left, it happens across the board.
Well, I'm glad to hear you guys agree, because I think sometimes, if people look at social media, they see varying viewpoints, they think there's no room for agreement, and you're clearly proving that wrong. I also, you bring up this point about the expectations, and this is a generation that has grown up with instant gratification on these very platforms, getting information so quickly, and sometimes I think the speed at which Gen Z thinks that the world works or that democracy works doesn't actually keep up with the way it does in practice. How then do we help young people feel like they actually have a stake in democracy if they aren't necessarily seeing their efforts play out in practice?
By a few things. Number one, teaching, right? Getting civics into all the schools, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So running younger candidates, getting people who look like young people into public office, getting young people on TV and cable news. Young people want to consume news from people that look like them, right? Number two. Number three, amplify young voices in corporations and media, across the board. The old guard of our country, older folks, need to recognize that young people don't want to listen to them. And a lot of the times it's simply because of their age, whether or not that's fair, but that's just the truth. And so you have to start amplifying younger voices. You cannot tell them to wait their turn. And especially you can't say, listen, I went through these hardships and therefore you have to go through these hardships. No. Gen Z is kind of writing its own path, and it's time for Gen Z to be amplified a little more.
You're going to get me in trouble, but I agree with Aaron on a lot of that. I would say, also to stop lying to young people, right? When you float these pie-in-the-sky policy proposals as if there's going to be some overnight change, and those things don't happen, young people lose trust. They lose trust in institutions, they lose trust in politicians, and it's just not realistic, in large part because our government wasn't designed to be a type of overnight fix. The Senate moves incredibly slow. Congress moves incredibly slow as a whole. And so when you're running on these immediate fixes to very, very deep and complex problems that don't have those types of immediate gratification or whatever else, people are going to be disappointed. And that's why, truly and truthfully, there are a lot of people on the right who are just freaking out about Mom Donnie in New York City. I want the guy to win. I actually don't care. I don't live in New York City. So he can win, and I want him to actually try to achieve the very many things that he has promised that he can achieve. Many things are actually not in the purview of the local government of New York City, because I believe that then people will realize that lofty promises on either side need to be actually questioned. Just because someone makes slick videos on TikTok or is well-spoken doesn't mean that you should buy into what they say. And again, that is not relegated to one side. That is on both sides of the aisle. But it is only then when I think you vote for something, you get a high off of it, and then you realize, oh, that person actually had no idea how to accomplish what they said, is when you actually are going to start asking tougher questions the next go around. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, can't be fooled again. That's a quote from J. Cole. Great rapper, by the way. So I think in all of that, I'm really curious about what the NYC election does, the ramifications long-term it will have on how young people feel about democracy and how young people feel about politicians in general, because obviously he has a huge support among young voters. Curious to see how they hold him accountable.
So we know, thanks to Gallup research, that trust in institutions is exceptionally low, especially when it comes to Gen Z. You both have built massive audiences of people who trust you across platforms and are part of this shifting media ecosystem. What kinds of civic spaces, community networks, or institutions help young people see that their participation in democracy actually does matter?
So I actually don't think it's any kind of established institution. I actually think organizing and community building happens more in a local neighborhood where young people go outside and play hide and seek with each other nowadays, or even on Roblox online if you're a young person, rather than in any established institution. Because I think, and it happens from both the right and the left, institutions have failed us. They have failed us for many years, especially this year, but the right will say institutions have failed us because of the weaponization of the Justice Department allegedly last year. The left will say institutions have failed us in a lot of ways because media companies have sold out to this administration, sane-washing what this administration is doing. And so young people don't trust, whether you're on the right or the left, they don't trust legacy institutions. And so I really think that the most community organizing that's happening is actually in communities, in these spaces where young people can see each other face-to-face or interact with each other online, because it's not happening with the traditional institutions.
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to it from the right. I think, as far as in-person institutions go, I think you've definitely seen post the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a lot of on-campus organizing happening on the right that a lot of young people have gotten involved in. I think we've seen 60,000 requests for new chapters all across the country for Turning Point to be started. I think online it's very decentralized, because I think that the same reason that a lot of people have lost trust in institutions, that trust has shifted to personalities and people, right? They're not trying to follow a CNN anymore or an MSNBC or whatever. They're trying to follow people that they trust. People trust Aaron, people trust you, and because of the way they feel about you guys, they're just okay, what they say matters to me. It doesn't matter what their publication says or what their boss says or whatever, I trust them. And so I think we've seen we're obviously, that creates a lot more responsibility on the shoulders of creators to be responsible arbiters of truth for our audiences and to be authentic. And it does muddy the waters in a sense, right? Because like influencers are not journalists, creators are not journalists. Oftentimes there are instances where you can get paid for someone to say, hey, for $10,000 you can make a video about this. And to our audience, maybe it's, maybe if it's labeled an ad, they know that it's sponsored content, but you don't have to do that the way that the law is currently written. And so I think that's going to be an interesting gray area once people learn more about how that all works, that like creators can literally be bought and paid for. I think that you run the risk of that same level of trust that we've seen erode towards institutions, eroding towards influencers as well.
I mean, I will say, if you look online at, I would say about 40% of political content nowadays is paid for, but you will never know it because you actually don't have to label any political content an ad. The FEC is 4-4, they're never going to get anything done. They're at gridlock. The FTC doesn't actually regulate political content. So there's millions of dollars being flown in on the right and the left into creators to push narratives, and their audience doesn't ever actually realize it, and it's actually one of the scariest things right now to me.
So along those lines, we have sort of circled around the topic of the difference between a journalist and a content creator, and the line is increasingly blurred every single day. And I'm curious if you have, in your perspective, a way that you draw the line between a journalist and a content creator, and also, are you talking about that on your platform for your followers to understand?
I mean, I think all journalists are content creators, but not all content creators are journalists. And what I mean by that is I think journalism, you're creating content, whether you're on radio, cable, print. Social media has just given people a different medium to present journalism. And so I think any journalist on social media is also a content creator. I do consider myself a journalist because I actually do source a lot of the stories that I cover myself. I get thousands of tips in my email inbox every single day. I run down stories myself. I don't get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for political content and never would. But there are very few people who, like me, have kind of those ethical standards in a way. I was a lawyer before I did any of this. I would never put anything out on my platform that I wouldn't put in front of a judge. If I lied in front of a judge, I would get disbarred. If I lied to my audience, I feel like I should deserve that same repercussion. But there are a lot of people, kind of like CJ was saying earlier, that would call themselves a journalist but are not. They're just political commentators. And it happens all the time. But unfortunately, because social media rewards outrage and rewards kind of the big headlines, that line is becoming increasingly blurred, and you actually don't know whether the information you're getting is even accurate anymore. And honestly, even with the rise in AI, it's actually become even scarier. I was scrolling on TikTok the other day, and there was a video of Anderson Cooper pops up, and it's my video. Anderson Cooper is using this AI version of Anderson Cooper is using my exact video, but it's just him talking in his voice, and it's my exact script. And I saw that, and I was like, wow, and it wasn't labeled AI at all by TikTok. That is scary to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a rapidly evolving landscape that I think that many people are still trying to really understand. I think I would agree that, content creators are not inherently journalists, but I think every journalist is having to become a content creator to continue their relevance, right? If you look at every Fox News primetime anchor right now, they're all on TikTok. And it's because they realize they have to adapt outside of just the, typical audience that is tuning in at 9 p.m. every single night. I think for me, I wouldn't consider myself a journalist. I'm not, talking to anyone off the record on background or doing anything like that. I'm very opinion driven. And I think that that's totally fine as long as that's what you're providing your audience and they know that's what they're getting from you. I think that if you portray yourself as a journalist, but you're really just an opinion journalist or an opinion columnist or whatever it may be, then that's when, the question of trust comes into play. But I think that's where media literacy is very important, is that it's important for audiences to be able to discern, is this person a content creator, an influencer, a pundit, basically, or are they an actual journalist, which is, I think that's the biggest crisis in our country right now, outside of the civics crisis, is the lack of media literacy in this country. I remember when it was like a funny thing that people would say, oh, the boomers, like, they, like, get, like, tricked by, like, those Facebook stories, like, Barack Obama, like, his birth certificate found in random thing. It's, like, crazy. But now it's, like, AI. Like, I saw a video of a dog fighting a bald eagle, and it looked very, very real. And I was like, there is no way this is not real. And I was like, I would have chose the bald eagle. But that bald eagle, hey, it's not here anymore. But what I'm telling you is that, like, all of this stuff is so surreal and crazy. And, like, AI is going to do to Gen Z what, like, those clickbait sites did to our grandparents. It's insane.
Yeah. Okay, we have a lot of people in the room who are practitioners in institutions and sort of more in the traditional world. And I'm curious what your advice is as you think about the new media ecosystem. And yes, a journalist, you know, there's a difference between a journalist and a content creator. But as you said, the eyeballs are on content creators. The audiences are there. We live in an attention economy. How can content creators work with legacy institutions to create a multi-generational way to communicate that resonates with Gen Z?
Well, I think the question should actually be flipped. It should be, how should legacy institutions work with content creators? Because content creators are willing and open. A lot of legacy institutions aren't. And until legacy institutions open their door and say, you know what, we're open to collaborating with a content creator, we're open to working with it. Legacy institutions are very afraid of brand safety issues. They don't want to touch content creators that'll get them canceled. Every content creator will get you canceled. Every content creator has a problem at some point in their life. You have to be willing to work with us, and I think that's the biggest thing. The first step is really jumping into the deep end and saying, okay, finally, we will work with the creator. We will outreach onto TikTok or Instagram. Until legacy institutions do that, it's not going to happen. Content creators have always and are willing to work with you all, so.
I would agree, and I would also say, like, in the course of your reporting, cultivate sources that are influencers. Because if you think about influencers, to be good at being an influencer, you have to have your finger on the pulse of your audience. So when you're trying to figure out what is the progressive base thinking about, what are they saying? What is the conservative base thinking about? What are they saying? These people read their comments, they read their DMs. As Aaron said, he gets thousands of messages every single day in his email inbox. So in terms of having our finger on the pulse, it's incredible because it's just, you know, I'm able to say, okay, whether I'm, you know, sitting across from someone at the White House or talking to a reporter, people really don't like this issue right now, or maybe we should message this better. And because of the immediate insights I get from my audiences, every time I post a video, I'm aware of that really keenly. But again, I would definitely agree with what he said. I think influencers, creators are definitely willing and able, want to be helpful to a lot of folks in the traditional media. That door just has to be open. We've seen an evolution of that. You know, you see now, like, you know, the Ruthless podcast, and, you know, Brett Cooper is a prominent YouTuber on the right. She just joined Fox News. Like, a lot of these platforms are welcoming influencers on MSNBC. I see they have Cameron Kasky on a good bit. He's a, you know, Dem influencer. So I think it's starting to evolve slowly but surely, but I think that door has to be open by traditional media first for it to be effective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, our final question for you both. What new democratic practices, either online or in person, have Gen Z already adopted, and where do you see this momentum going from here?
I think Gen Z has become their own fact checkers. It's pretty interesting to see. I think I can post a video on TikTok, and I will have maybe like sometimes 100, 200, 300 videos criticizing or fact-checking what I just posted. Sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it's right, whatever. But it only helps the content that I produce, actually, because it shows me what other people are thinking, young people, what they're thinking about the issue that I'm talking about. So Gen Z has become our own fact-checking machine. And it has its pros and its cons. They're not actually relying, most of these fact-checkers are not relying on legitimate facts. They're relying on their opinions or what they think, right? But it is creating a kind of this new age environment where Gen Z is, and young people as a whole, not just Gen Z, they're really just adapting to this new media landscape, and they're actually being interested in the news, and they're interested in what's happening in government. And I think that's so important. Yeah, I think the more, it really just shows that they're getting interested, and I think that's where it's going in the future as well.
Yeah, I would say, democracy is nothing without levers of accountability, right? And that accountability is either coming from the voters, it's coming from the media, or some other type of institution. And Gen Z is very good at holding their leaders accountable online. They will flood those DMs, they will flood those comments. And one thing that's really interesting to me, and I'm someone who is a supporter of Israel, is that there is a platform called Track AIPAC. And it's a Gen Z Instagram page which tracks all the donations that AIPAC has made to members of Congress, presidential candidates, all of that stuff. And when they post you on that account, oh my God. I mean, I don't even, it's crazy. And I'm like, wow. But that's a completely organic thing. And at the end of the day, it's all public information in that sense. But dogged in terms of their pursuit of truth and holding themselves accountable based on their ideology, whether it's left or right. In that respect, it's about AIPAC, but I'm sure there's pro-Israel accounts that are also holding people accountable for supporting Palestine. So it's interesting. I think that's the biggest thing. I think Gen Z really demands accountability from not only their elected leaders, but also their influencers. They want to make sure that you're actually living what you're saying and you're truthful to who you are. And we've seen many cancellations because of that. It's been quite interesting.
Thank you both so much, and thank you to Gallup and Kettering.
Thank you so much.
Now please welcome to the stage for concluding remarks, President and CEO of Kettering Foundation, Sharon Davies.
Wow, that was fascinating to listen to. So I have the privilege of closing out this morning's session. I'm Sharon Davies. I'm the president and CEO of the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. The Charles F. Kettering Foundation is almost 100 years old, for those of you who aren't that familiar with us. And over the last 40 plus years of that time, we have been focused on one thing, and that is advancing the health of democracy, both domestically and around the world. So when a team from Gallup, led by Jim, came to us summer of 2024, we were talking about what we might learn if the Charles F. Kettering Foundation partnered with Gallup and did a thorough, careful, well thought out poll of Americans to think about questions like, is the attachment of Americans to democracy eroding? What do Americans think about the performance of democracy, our government leaders? What do they think about each other, fellow citizens, and their attachments to democracy? And how might that be changing based on different generations of Americans? I found that conversation, Jim, with these young people fascinating because of what we learned with this new first poll that we have done. When the Gallup team and Kettering decided to move forward with this partnership, which we're very honored to do, it was before the election of 2024. We didn't know how that was going to come out, but we both believed that it was going to be important to have clarity about what Americans believed about democracy, no matter who won that election. We had no way of knowing that we would be releasing this report just days after a nationwide set of rallies and marches by Americans who are distressed about democracy. And we had no way of knowing that when we released the report that it would be in the middle of a government shutdown that is causing pain to many Americans. So we went forward with that, and I'm fascinated with our findings. I hope you all are too, because they raise more questions, I think, in my mind, that we really need to find answers to for those of us who are dedicated to the survival of democracy. The Kettering Foundation believes in all kinds of research about Americans' attachment to democracy, what the needs of democracy are, what the greatest threats to democracy are, and how can the public be encouraged to be engaged in the defense of democracy. Some of that we do, like you saw two of our senior fellows here. Some of it we do qualitatively. Sarah Longwell is a perfect example of that. She does all those focus groups. Some of it is comparative, like the work of Erica Franz, who you heard from, and who studies authoritarianism around the world. And she is joined by another senior fellow of ours, Steve Levitsky, some of you know, from Harvard, who wrote that great book, How Democracies Die. So we believe in a variety of approaches, including this approach that we are featuring today, a quantitative approach from the extraordinary Gallup team. We think it's important to look at this from multiple angles, and just hearing these young people also adds to our understanding about where the public is right now on democracy. The good news from this poll that we have just completed is maybe the surprising finding that 2/3 of Americans are deeply committed to democracy, believe that democracy is the best form of governance. Maybe that's surprising to us today because we hear so much about the erosion of the attachment in the United States to democracy. And if that is true, it is a threat to democracy, not just in the United States, but around the world. So it was very good news to us when we saw 2/3 of Americans continue to think that democracy is the best form of governance. But when we drilled down just a little closer and we broke that into age groups, we saw what this panel was just talking about, a serious erosion by age group that we cannot take for granted. We have to understand better than we do. So if you were a boomer, if you were 65 years or older, 80% of those Americans said democracy is the best form of governance. But Gen X, 56 to 64-ish, 71% of that group said democracy is the best form. By the time we get to millennials, only 63% of those Americans said that democracy was the best form of governance. And Gen Z, 53% of that group. Now that is a stunning decline in the attachment of Americans by age group to democracy. We have to understand this better. Because these are, as they just said, these are the future leaders of our country. And if we want democracy to survive both in the United States and around the world, we have to be able to persuade our youngest Americans that democracy is worth fighting for. So these are the kinds of reasons why we do this kind of careful study, and that we took the time to include over 20,000 people in this poll, and we will continue to work with the Gallup team to do that. What we hope, now that we have this data, and we begin to get scholars and the public thinking about these findings, that we will do the work that is necessary to turn that trend line around with the involvement of our youngest American voices. Benjamin Franklin once said that if you tell me something, I'll forget it. If you teach me something, I may remember it, but if you involve me in something, I will learn it. We must involve all Americans in the fight for democracy, and we look forward to doing that work in partnership with incredible organizations like Gallup and its team in the months and years to come. Thank you.
And with that, this event is adjourned. The full report and findings of this research will be available in the coming weeks, and we look forward to sharing it with you all.